Right, we'll start in just a minute, so let's wait for the gentleman over by the bar to draw attention to him as he walks back with his coffee by himself. Thought I'd try and make you kind of knock it in your hand a little bit, you know, sort of get a bit nervous, something like that.
Thank you very much.
All part of the service.
Am I allowed to heckle?
Well, you are now, I've done that to you, so that's fine. So no one else is allowed to heckle you specifically are. I'll allow that, that's fine. Well, good morning everyone. Thanks for coming to the first morning news for Big Green Week. My name's Matt Reeves and I'm from Good Energy. Now we're the UK's only 100% renewable electricity company, and we are associated with the whole programme of events here at Big Green Week. So we're very excited to be here this morning and also to be associated with the entire Big Green Week event. I thought I'd read the thing that I'm supposed to be talking about just to make sure that I don't horrendously not meet anyone's expectations. So it says here that this morning we're going to be talking about the 40 countries that hold our energy future in their hands. Now, it's reasonably well known in the UK the sorts of fuel that are used to make electricity. The government publishes figures on this every year. It's in the public domain, it's very easy to find. So last year I can tell you that about 29% of the electricity in the UK was generated from coal, for instance. 44% was generated from gas, and about 18% was generated from nuclear. All of these things are quite well known. But what's less well known is where the fuel that is used to generate those pieces of electricity comes from. So what countries are we relying on for our source of fuel in the future? Now that's actually surprisingly difficult to find out. I was asked the question by my CEO, Juliet Davenport. She said, okay, Matt, we need to find out where this fuel is coming from. We need to see what impact that has on the government's fuel policy in the UK. And she set me and one of my colleagues the task of trying to find out where that fuel is actually being purchased from. What we found is that's actually surprisingly difficult to do. That information isn't too readily available and it's quite complicated to find. So we had to embark on a little bit of research to try and work out where that fuel was coming from. And what we discovered was very interesting, and that's why we thought we'd come here today and share the results of that with you and get your views on whether you think that's a problem. So there's three things we're going to talk about today. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to present to you the results of what we found. So the 40 countries that we found that the UK relies on heavily for our fuel to make electricity. So that's the first thing we're going to do. The second thing we're going to do is talk about whether that really matters. Is that important? What difference does that make to our daily lives? Why should we be concerned or not about where the electricity is coming from? And the third thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about an alternative. So what's a different way forward, an alternative view for the future that takes us away from the current situation? Now, I'm going to ask a few questions as we go along, just because I want to get an understanding of how people feel about this. So the first one is, does anyone really spend an awful lot of time thinking about where we rely on, what countries we rely on for the fuel for electricity? Has anyone thought about that? Is anyone aware of any issues that might exist around that? Yes, my friend at the back is first.
Not as yet.
Yes. Okay. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Well, the only issues then, in terms of gas, I think security is right.
Yeah, very much so. And one of the things we found when we were looking at gas was those issues are there, but they're actually slightly different issues than I expected to find. So we'll talk about that in some more detail when we get there. Now, just to explain what we did, we used government data to find out where we import fuel from. So we went off to the DEC, Department for Energy and Climate Change. We got as much data as we could, and we used that to look at what happened in 2010. So this is data for 2010, because that's the most recent year that all of the information we required was available for. And what we found was, for that year, the UK was importing around 60% of the fuel it needed to generate electricity. So only 40% of the fuel that was used to generate electricity in the UK for 2010 was indigenous, was from the UK. The rest of it was imported from somewhere or other. What we also found was that figure had been increasing. So that has been on the up since 2007, 2008, 2009. Going into 2010, we reached a situation where 60% of the fuel that we needed came from outside the UK's shores. And that was very concerning for us, because we felt that we wanted to be moving towards a more secure fuel supply system, not a less secure fuel supply system. So that was a major concern for us. And that caused us to look into this in some more detail. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the pretty picture, which I'm not responsible for. I should add, this is not my pretty picture. My colleague, the head of marketing, is responsible for pretty pictures in our office, so this one is his. But what you can see is the breakdown of where the fuel comes from to generate electricity in the UK. And you can get a feeling of the areas of the globe which we're majorly reliant on. Now, some of these may come as no surprise to you. For instance, if you look across to Asia and the Middle East, you'll notice that almost 17% of the UK's fuel for electricity is coming from that part of the world. Now, that may not be a huge surprise when you consider that the major players like Russia and the Middle Eastern countries are coming from that part of the world. 9% coming from Europe. Again, maybe not too surprising, but you've got these more far-flung reaches of the globe here. South America, North America, Africa, Australia, where we're seeing fuel coming into the UK from to generate electricity. And for me, those were the sort of areas that were really interesting, that I wanted to spend some more time looking at. So, first thing to talk about is coal. Now, I'm sure you're all aware that the UK electricity sector used to be dominated by coal. Coal used to be the dominant fuel used to generate electricity. Less so these days, because of its high carbon emissions. People have been moving away, the major players are moving away towards gas and towards nuclear and towards renewables as lower carbon sources of electricity generation. But coal, as I said, still makes up almost 30% of the electricity in the UK is generated from coal. So it's still a significant chunk of our electricity demand is met by that. What I was really interested to find out was, well, I was aware of the UK coal industry. I was aware that that had been in decline for some time. What I wasn't aware of is that we only produce a third of the coal that we need to generate electricity in this country. The rest of it we import. And that for me was a very powerful piece of information. So I thought to myself, okay, well, I know that we've had the capacity to mine coal in the UK, and that has increasingly gone overseas. But what I didn't realise is that we still had to import 2/3 of what we needed from other countries. What also surprised me is the countries that coal was coming from. Now, there are 3 big countries which are delivering the majority of that coal into the UK. I don't know if anyone knows any major coal exporting countries. It's a very exciting piece of information. I'm sure it's all on the tip of everyone's tongue. Does anyone have any awareness of where might be a coal-producing country that we might buy our coal from?
Australia.
Australia, okay. Poland, okay. Any others? South Africa, okay. Interesting. None of those are the right answer, but they're all coal-producing countries. They just don't sell their coal to us.
The Americans.
The Americans, okay. You're closer to the mark, my friend. The major source of coal for generating electricity in the UK comes from Russia. So 45% of our coal imports for electricity generation were from Russia. That's head and shoulders the biggest source of our coal imports, but in the study we looked at. Now, I traditionally associated, I'm a master's student, and I've been doing a study on renewable energy. It's been one of my thesis topics, and I was very surprised when I found out I was aware of the supply dependency, or my perceived dependency, on Russia for gas and for oil, but I wasn't aware of their very strong play in the coal market, particularly the steam coal market, which is what's used primarily to generate electricity. There are other types of coal as well, which are used for other purposes. But 45%, a very significant chunk of our imports coming from just that single country. The 2 other countries that deliver any sort of volume of coal imports into the UK are the USA and Colombia. Those are the only other 2 countries from which we import any significant volume of steam coal. Now that for me was very interesting. I was completely unaware that some people may be aware, I wasn't aware of any kind of import behaviour coming in from Colombia, the USA possibly, but 11% of our coal imports coming from the USA. Very surprising to me, very surprising indeed. So from my point of view, that's very concerning from the point of view of the distance that coal travels to reach from its mined location to its final destination, and increasing our reliance on Russia as well, not just for gas, but also for coal. And that, for me, is a very surprising finding. I don't know if that's counterintuitive for any of you guys. Was that what you expected, different from what you expected?
There seem to be much bigger issues than just where the coal comes from. I mean, environmental and human rights issues, particularly in places like Colombia.
Certainly, you're quite right. And I think that's what's really important for me, is for people to have visibility of this information. That's what's really important, because I had to go and try and find this. I had to try quite hard to find this information. And I kind of feel that in this day and age, the supply chain of a product that we all purchase should be clear to us. It should be very obvious if we're making a decision, consciously or otherwise, to support a trade that's unethical or is supporting of any kind of dangerous practices or unethical practices, we should be aware of that and we should be able to make a choice. That's why we wanted to bring this information to the public attention. So from my point of view, that's coal. Now gas was very interesting for me, personally. I had an assumption about gas, because I, like most of you, have probably seen the stories in the news, particularly about Russia turning off the supply to the Ukraine some years ago, in a particularly bad spell of weather in the Ukraine, and those sort of issues around security of supply coming into the European gas grid. So you hear an awful lot about that. You hear a lot about issues around pipelines through Iran and other such places, and those sort of things really dominate the supply security debate as far as energy is concerned in the UK. What I wasn't aware of is that that's not really the whole story, and there's much more to it than meets the eye. Now, the first thing to notice is that the UK used to be, as everyone knows, a very big exporter of natural gas. While our North Sea oil and gas reserves were at their peak, we were exporting a very significant amount of natural gas onto the international market. The first thing to notice is that that's no longer the case. We're a net importer of gas. We have been a net importer of gas for a number of years now, and for the year we looked at this, 2010, it was 50-50. So we only supplied 50% of the gas that we needed to meet our own needs from our own reserves. The rest of it was imported from various sources. So that's gone from a situation of being a fairly big exporter 10 years ago to a 50% importer as I speak to you now. So that for us is a very significant shift. And as we all in this room know, that situation isn't likely to improve significantly. Our demand for gas is growing, our ability to find new sources of indigenous resources of gas is shrinking. And although we may find some small new reserves, it's unlikely we're going to get the size of reserve that we've had in the past. So for us, we can only see that situation worsening. We can only see that percentage that we're going to be able to supply declining. But where does the rest of it come from? Now, I'd made an assumption that there were gas pipelines. There are gas pipelines. And I thought, okay, we probably buy gas from the pipes that come in from Europe. So we probably buy it from the European gas grid. Now, that's true. About 2/3 of it we do buy from the European gas grid. But a third of it we don't. So the question is, where does it come from? So if a third of it's not coming through the European gas grid, from where is it coming? Well, the answer is liquefied natural gas. Now, I knew about liquefied natural gas, but some of you are nodding in recognition of this, so does everyone know what liquefied natural gas is? Some shakes, some nods, so I shall tell you just in case. Liquefied natural gas is gas that's not transported through the pipeline system, but it's taken on tankers. So it's pressurised and put on tankers, taken across the sea. And there's a few import terminals, I think there's one in Milford Haven, where you can depressurise that gas and utilise it as standard natural gas within the network. Now, I hadn't appreciated this, that 35% of the UK's gas, just over a third, is liquefied natural gas. Now, 2 or 3 years ago, that was essentially zero. We weren't buying liquefied natural gas in any kind of quantity 2 or 3 years ago, and now it's making up a third of the imports that we bring into this country. That's one thing. Second thing is where we get it from. The major country that we buy our liquefied natural gas from is the very, very small Middle Eastern country called Qatar. Once you add in the stuff we buy directly and the stuff we buy indirectly, because they also sell to the European gas grid, so we buy indirectly some Qatari gas through that method, 30% of the UK's gas imports are reliant on one single small Middle Eastern country in the form of liquefied natural gas and European gas that we buy. 30%. That's more than Russia, almost double the amount that we get from Russia. And for me, that was incredibly significant. So not only is that a very single, small place, but it's also, in a very similar way to people who are concerned about security of supply, as my friend said, in reference to oil, and thinking, okay, Middle East, not a good place to rely for oil. Exactly the same is true for gas. Oil tends to be found where you find gas, and increasingly, oil-producing nations are becoming liquefied natural gas-producing nations because they see that there is a market for it. Now that for me was incredibly significant. I wasn't aware of that. Was anyone else aware of the fact that we get so much gas from Qatar? Anyone else? Is that something that concerns anyone, or is that just me? Just me then. From my point of view, that is one of the most significant aspects of this debate, is being able to find where things come from and understand what the consequences of those decisions are. The final thing is nuclear. So the final major power source that we import fuel for is nuclear. Now, we don't have any uranium in this country of a sufficient quality to power a nuclear power station. As such, we import all of our nuclear fuel into the UK. So we've got 100% import dependence for nuclear fuel. The main difference is you don't need quite as much of it. You don't need as much volume of it, so it's not seen in the same terms. But on our chart here, it's represented by the amount of energy it supplies. And that really changes the picture somewhat, because you can suddenly see, although it's a small amount of fuel, the amount of energy that's providing into the UK system is really quite significant. Now, the major uranium-producing country in the world is Kazakhstan. It has it's about a third of the world's production of uranium comes from Kazakhstan. Very significant producer. However, there's no evidence that the UK buys any uranium from Kazakhstan at this time. It's quite cloak and dagger finding out where the UK buys its nuclear fuel from. When I rang up DEC and asked them, they said they don't keep a record of that. I suspect they probably do, but they didn't want to tell me. But that's another story. So we had to go on market data. Because nuclear fuel is traded on a market, it's bought and sold as a commodity, so it's possible to find some information about it, which is what we had to go on. So as far as we're aware, there's really sort of three places that the UK relies on for its uranium sources. Australia, which my friend already mentioned, is also a significant producer of coal. Canada and Namibia are the other three really big significant uranium producers, which the UK is reliant on for our future supply of uranium. But the important thing to mention here is that this is all outside of the UK's shores, so we're completely at the vulnerability to the international supply and cost of uranium. So that's what we found. But you're probably wondering, well, does that really matter? Is that important? We live in a world these days where there's a global market for everything. There's a global market of supply, there's a global market of demand. So does it actually really matter that we're plugged into this international network supplying us with the fuel we need for our electricity? Should we really spend any sleepless nights worrying about that? Well, we at Good Energy think we should, and there's a few reasons for that. The first one is actually a cost reason. It's a cost and it's a price reason. Now, Centrica, I don't know if you've seen this, Centrica are the owners of British Gas, and they've come out with a statement recently talking about the price of gas, so the price of the commodity gas to produce electricity. And they've said that they can only foresee that increasing over the coming 10 to 15 years. So they cannot foresee a situation where the price of gas is going to significantly decrease or even hold stable over the coming 10 to 15 years. And this is the owners of British Gas coming out and saying this. So clearly there's a significant reason for that. Last year, we saw a number of energy companies increase their prices quite significantly. Those sat in front of me may have been victims of this to greater or lesser extent. A couple of suppliers put their prices up twice during the year. Most prices increased by around 20% during the year, both electricity and for gas. And the government essentially finds this is the fault of the wholesale price of gas. The wholesale price of gas increased last year, partly due to the increased demand for gas in the aftermath of the Fukushima incident, but also due to other market reasons. And that drove both the price of electricity, the price of gas, and also inflation in this country quite significantly. So all of those three things can be traced back to the price of this base commodity. So being plugged into a world market means, in the UK certainly, it means potentially increasing electricity prices, but it also means potentially unstable electricity prices. And for government policy, that's really hard. So when you're trying to look into dealing with fuel poverty, people who aren't able to pay their electricity bill without spending 10% of their income on it, a 20% increase or a volatile price is a real issue. The second thing my friend has already mentioned, which is about security of supply. So how can we make sure that we're going to have access to these sources of fuel in the future? When you build a new gas power station, you expect to use it, let's say, for 35 years. So when we go ahead and build new gas plants, we're saying, yes, we want to buy into this situation for another 25 to 35 years. What's this situation going to be like? I already mentioned that liquefied natural gas was nowhere to be seen 3 or 4 years ago in the UK. Now it's all over the place. So how much more is the situation going to change and develop over the next 25 to 35 years? What are we signing ourselves up for? is a major consideration for us as far as we're concerned. And another thing is is issues around international conflicts. Now, this is often mentioned in the case of oil, obviously with reference to the Iraqi conflict, but increasing international tensions with Iran are expected to cause issues in the Persian Gulf. Qatar, in order to get liquefied natural gas out of Qatar, you've got to take it through the Persian Gulf. So the government is currently extremely concerned about the fact that a conflict with Iran is going to compromise that 30% of our gas that we're getting from Qatar. This is the difficulty with having one place that you rely so heavily on. This is always the problem. And the final thing which is important as far as we're concerned is investment. Now, if we have the ability to produce our own electricity in the UK using fuels that we control, the opportunity for inbound investment into the UK is increased. And that's a really important thing. We personally believe at Good Energy that there's an opportunity for the UK electricity industry and the energy sector as a whole to grow and to become more of an industry with a more significant impact on jobs and employment in the UK. But that's less likely to happen if you rely on primary fuels that are coming into the country from outside, rather than fuels that we control and we can own. So from our point of view, those are the three significant issues: security of supply, price, both stability and the absolute increase in price, and inbound investment. So having said all that, what's the alternative? There must be an alternative. We at Good Energy think there is, which requires board too. With a hair on it. So, I don't know if before you sat down here this morning you had any awareness of Good Energy, but we're the UK's only 100% renewable electricity supplier. And we buy our electricity, unlike the other main suppliers who get it from the system we described before. We don't do that. What we do is we buy our power from a network of 35,000 generators in the UK. This is a map of them. This is where they are in the UK. So we have small domestic customers that we purchase power from through the feed-in tariff and through other mechanisms, but we also have large commercial installations that we buy power from, and we have one that we own ourselves down in Delabole in Cornwall. But we believe that the energy landscape of the UK could be very different, and we believe it could be more like this and less like the picture I showed you before. We believe that having a decentralised energy supply with a mix of different renewable energy technologies can provide a number of benefits. We think firstly, it can spread the benefits of electricity generation. It can do a number of things. It can reduce transmission losses, so the amount of electricity that's lost between being generated and reaching your plug socket. Many people don't know, for instance, that gas plants are typically only 40% efficient. Only 40% of the gas that goes in is actually generated into electricity. A significant loss. So not only are you paying all of that money and environmental cost to get the gas across to the UK, once you get it here, you're not using it efficiently. We believe there's another way. So since we launched 10 years ago, we've gone from no generators to 35,000 across the UK. And today, as I speak to you, we supply 30,000 electricity supply customers in the UK who've decided they want to buy into this system rather than the system that I showed you before. And we have a vision to get to 2050, and when we get there, we believe that we can have an 100% renewable electricity system, where we're in control of both the fuel, because the fuel is free, and we're in control of the infrastructure and the resources. So we're keeping the benefits within the UK, and we're keeping price under control, and we're keeping the marketplace under our control, not at the whim of the international markets. That's what we believe, and we believe this future is available to all. And that is our morning news for this morning. Thank you very much for your time listening. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments or want to have a chat? I'll start with you, my friend. Just put your hand up first. Well, Scotland has a significant wind resource, that's for sure. And there are a large number of energy companies at the moment looking into putting particularly wind turbine installations up in Scotland, but they're also looking for wave and wind tidal resources in Scotland too. So I think that if that situation comes around, there will need to be a shift in energy planning and energy policy from an English perspective. Having said that, we find that, I mean, the Southwest, for instance, has the best solar resource in the UK. and has a very competitive wind resource in that area as well. And there are also tidal and wave opportunities in that area. So we believe there are solutions either way, with an independent Scotland or without. Yes, my friend.
You mentioned that I think 2050 was it 100%. What percentage of total energy supply would that be? I mean, in terms of requirements for oil, what percentage of the total energy needs would in fact be electricity? And how do you see the changes, in terms of electric cars and so on?
Yes. Just in case you didn't hear that, my friend was asking, when we reach 2050, what's our opinion on whether the amount of demand for electricity will have increased relative to the oil demand at the moment?
The question is, what percentage of energy needs will actually be electricity as opposed to alternate oil and coal?
We believe that the amount of electricity requirement is going to increase for two reasons. Electric vehicles you've already mentioned, we think those are going to come on stream, not just as a transport option, but also as a demand management option. There is an important area that needs to be discussed, which is about if you have a lot of renewables on the grid, how do you make sure that you can meet supply and demand? And that's a very different situation to the situation we're in now, where we could, for example, if we get a peak, because everyone's going to put the kettle on during Coronation Street, we have plant that's available that we can control quite quickly and switch on, which in a renewable situation potentially won't be the case. So we believe there's a role for electric vehicles in that respect, as indeed the Centre for Alternative Technology do, as a kind of a backup store, a swing provider, I suppose, of peak power. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we believe that there's going to be a large increase in renewable heat by 2050, particularly in the context of heat pumps and technologies like that. I can't answer your question precisely because I don't recall the exact percentage that we have in the scenario, but we definitely believe it's going to increase, and we obviously definitely believe that the demand for oil we focus very much on electricity because that's our business, but we believe that there will be there has to be a decrease in the oil requirement, and that has to be met to a large extent by electricity. I'm sorry, my friend, did you have...
Yeah, I was only going to ask you to explain the different kind of dots on there, and I would have expected to see more distribution in the very windy places and around the coast. But I suppose that's because it's the bigger companies that invest in offshore and in windy places, and you sort of pick up the other parts.
Yeah, we, as I mentioned, we have a strong belief in a decentralised energy system. So we wouldn't like to see a single company or a single group of companies owning such a large percentage of the generation capacity for the UK. I don't know what the percentage is, but the big six energy suppliers in this country own probably more than 99% of the generation capacity in the UK. It's incredibly significant, and we'd like to see that change. So we have a fundamental belief that it should look like this. There should be a spread of people choosing to generate their own electricity, or farmers choosing to diversify their income stream by generating electricity and exporting that as an income source. We have a lot of customers who choose to do that. So, as far as I'm concerned, it will be a sad thing for Good Energy if one day we went, okay, well that's fine, we'll sod all this and we'll just slap a massive offshore wind turbine over here somewhere and that'll be fine. That's not what we believe in. We believe in democratising energy, in engaging people more with energy, making them more interested, more engaged with where it comes from. What we found is that larger cities, I mean, you can see some here in the Midlands here, where you wouldn't necessarily expect to see perhaps large amounts of solar or other installations. Quite a lot of that are housing associations who are choosing to reduce their residents' energy bills, and they're taking the income that they get from the government feed-in tariff to improve the buildings. So there's kind of a double benefit there, I suppose. So the council tenant benefits from a reduced energy bill, which is obviously a very good thing, because a number of those individuals can be in fuel poverty. And the housing association gains a source of income, which they can employ other energy efficiency measures, like improved insulation and such like. So that's the sort of really innovative use of the government scheme that we're really interested in, and that's why we've really supported the growth of these type of enterprises. And that's what you see over here in this area, and also in these areas too. Down in the southwest, as I mentioned, we have a very, very good solar resource. It's the best solar resource in the UK. And you probably can't read this from here, but the Bristol postcode area contains the most good energy generators of any other place in the UK. So we're sitting right now in the good energy heartland, if you know what I mean, in the beating heart of what good energy stands for. Yes, my friend.
I was also wondering how you see the proportion of solar, wind and tidal going into the future.
We believe that if you look out beyond out towards our 2050 vision, we believe there is a very strong role for wave and tidal energies over that time frame. Not over the short next 5 to 10 year time frame, because we're still very much in the development phase of those technologies, but we do believe those will provide a valuable resource. I think according to our own projections for 2050, there are other technologies involved, so you have to forgive me for not knowing the numbers off the top of my head, but I think we're talking about 40% wind of varying descriptions, about 20% solar, and we believe there's a 10% role for wave and tidal technologies when we reach that point. But the thing about wave and tidal is they're going to come on stream later, in all probability. If we're being realistic, commercial scale wave and tidal schemes are going to be some years away yet, and there's going to be some years still further before they become optimised and deliver their best possible return. But I'm personally a big fan of those type of schemes, and I think that there's a really strong role for them in the future.
I'm quite surprised you put such a small figure on solar there, because that's sort of coming down in cost. What's the reasons for that?
I think it's because solar performs a valuable role in the context of mixture of energy. But what you have to imagine is, if you look at the output of a solar panel of any size, it kind of goes like this. So you get peak power, the vast majority of the power delivered between the hours of 12 and 2. Now that's not very useful for the majority of domestic people. So that's fine at the moment because it's only a small part of the UK supply going into the grid, so it can be managed using other things. But if you get to a situation where you're 100% renewable, that swing becomes very significant and you have to manage that swing. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. Either you can assume that demand management can happen and you can kind of incentivize people, or have appliances that you can switch on and switch off remotely that would kick in during that period to use that extra demand. But that's a fairly big assumption. So we don't think that that's going to be the thing. It's not a panacea. As part of the mix, it's very valuable because there are a lot of business premises that would use a lot of energy during the day, and for that, a solar system can be ideal. But as the only thing, or as 25 or 30% of the thing, we don't think that's the way. Yes, my friend.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier in terms of big energy companies going to gas.
Yes.
I mean, the reason for that is purely an economic reason. It's a phenomenally profitable thing to do.
Yes.
It's nothing to do with being more green.
No.
I mean, and you can build a gas power station very quickly on a very small site, as long as you've got gas pipe coming to it.
Absolutely.
And the other bits were about the gas prices, central government predict gas prices going up. That is a lot of that has to do with softening up consumers for price hikes, and me being very cynical, you see. And the other bit, in terms of things like the renewable energies, as I've been member of Baywood for 14 years, and your renewable energy is very expensive. It may have a stable price, but it is very expensive currently. I mean, you look at the feed-in tariffs. The reason the feed-in tariffs are where they are is to incentivise people to do it, and basically it's the poor subsidising the middle class, and that's the reality of renewable energy. It has been probably we're all the middle class sat here, but unfortunately that's how it is, and I'm kind of reluctant to. I haven't gone down the feed-in tariffs because I'm kind of reluctant to be stealing from the poor.
Okay, well, you've made 3 interesting points there, so let me respond to those one at a time, if that's all right. Gas, you're quite right in terms of the cost of installing a gas plant, significantly cheaper than other available technologies. So, of course, if you're a big energy supplier and you need some new generation capacity, you're probably going to look to gas. You're quite right. There's a figure which says that the UK has decreased its carbon emissions over the last 10, 15 years since Kyoto. The Kyoto commitments, and everyone kind of looks quite excited and goes, whoop-de-doo, look at us go. That's fundamentally to do with shifting from coal to gas as an electricity source. So you're right, it isn't for environmental reasons. My point was it has an environmental impact that is less than perhaps a coal station would do. To take your point about feed-in tariffs, we at Good Energy we had a feed-in tariff before the government launched their own feed-in tariff, and the rates that we had on that feed-in tariff were lower than the scheme the government went with in the end. We believe that there should be a sustainable feed-in tariff arrangement in the UK that incentivises generators that will last for a long time, effectively. What we've seen with the current feed-in tariff arrangements is a sort of a boom and bust type thing, where the rate has been put at a certain level, that's encouraged a lot of entrants to come into the market, then it's been cut right back down, which has caused a marketplace issue. Now we believe that it should be possible to have an incentive for renewables that is sustainable over the long term and doesn't penalise any customer group adversely. And the final point you made was about the price of renewables. You're quite right. Renewables have been stable. I mean, I can only talk about our electricity price because we only buy renewables, so we'd be uniquely exposed to this, I suppose. The last time we changed our price was in 2009, and since then we've held our electricity price dead stable. We've not touched it. Now, back in 2009, we were about 20% more expensive than the big six. So if you were to look at the standard tariff, you were to go into Uswitch or wherever and look up the standard prices for all of the companies, you'd find that Good Energy were about 20% more. As I speak to you today, we're 1% less on our standard electricity prices than the big six, due to all the increases they've put through. So we believe that by trading correctly, by trading renewables properly, you can have a system which is sustainable for renewables. And I would say that the lion's share of our generation comes from generators that are not under the feed-in tariff, but are in fact under the larger scale renewables systems in the UK, the ROC system and the renewables obligation, and not under the feed-in tariff system. So I would say to you, yes, you're right, but I would also say to you that the relative cost is now a completely different story to what it was a few years ago. Any other questions, thoughts, my friend? No? No, you're in.
On behalf of those who aren't here and who aren't so interested or committed, how are you going to persuade so many local authorities, people around the country, that they will have to accept large-scale investment in both onshore and offshore wind turbines rather than ban them?
It's a very challenging area because we've seen a large amount of increasing public awareness of these technologies, and a very powerful sort of anti-lobby in a lot of cases has been coming to play on planning applications and such like. We as a company, we're not the biggest player in the market in terms of developments, so we're never going to be developing 100 or 150 sites at any given time. We're a relatively small organisation. But our chosen approach is to engage with communities throughout the projects that we choose to involve ourselves with. So we find that a lot of the issues come about because communities aren't going to see any benefit from the technologies coming into their area. So if you imagine you've got a massive wind farm being installed by someone, I'll choose one at random, British Gas or Centrica, saying, okay, we're going to build a massive wind farm down the road from you. That's not a consultative process, that's just, we're going to do this. It's seen as the same as a gas power plant or a coal power plant or just some centrally owned resource that isn't benefiting any kind of local communities. What we like to see is communities being involved. So in Bath, you've probably heard, there's an energy co-op in Bath who are doing some quite interesting things in partnership with the local authority, and saying, okay, we're going to install technologies, we're going to raise money, we're going to raise investment from individuals in the community to invest in renewable energy technologies on public buildings, like schools and council offices and such like. And in return for that, you're going to get free electricity, which is good for you, and we're going to provide a modest return to the people who invest in the cooperative. So that's a really innovative approach that we really support. For our own developments, we like to employ things like community tariffs and community funds. So we like to say, okay, we're going to put the benefits back into the community of having this. So we're going to give you a cheaper electricity rate because you are next door to our facility. So that's good news for you. You're going to see some benefit from the electricity that's being generated down the street from you. Or a community fund. Our wind farm in Delabole has an annual community fund, which we put a fixed amount of money in according to how much we generate, and then that's spent by the community on whatever they choose. Up in the Scottish Islands, there's a number of offshore off-grid systems where they take the income that they generate from exporting electricity and they use it to improve their municipal facilities. So, for example, up on the island of Eye, up off the coast of Scotland, they have an off-grid system, but they sell their exported power back to the grid, and with the proceeds they've built a number of new municipal facilities on the island, and the locals love it for that reason, because they can see something coming back to them. I think the problem isn't the technology, the problem is the perception of a big business or somebody coming in to make money at your expense And I think that's a key issue that we have to get around if we're going to move the planning agenda forward for renewables in the UK, in my opinion. Yes, my friend.
If you're a small commercial organisation, company, looking to switch, I mean, how does the tariffs compare for companies as opposed to domestic?
Companies are slightly different. If you buy your electricity from a company like Good Energy, you'll be exempt from the climate change levy, which is applied on business energy bills because we're 100% renewable, so there is no climate change levy to be paid. So you gain a cost benefit there. It's done according to a bespoke pricing based on your demand, because for larger users, that's the way all suppliers have to do it. So if you're a business who's looking to switch, the best thing to do is to get in touch with the supplier, give us a few bits of information about your demand, and then we can usually price based on that. But I can't give you a sort of a concrete indication, because for example, a business came to us the other day who had a really strong daytime demand, and we've got quite a lot of solar on our books at the moment, and that meant we were able to give them a very keen price, because that was a commodity that we had quite a lot of. So it really does depend on the demand profile of the business, is what I would say. Yes, my friend.
How do you actually balance supply and demand? Because clearly, you are not going to be generating, in terms of the actual contract suppliers, are not going to be generating exactly what the demand is. Are you balancing it over time, or and it's like I was thinking organic milk is that being a farmer is that organic milk you can actually use. At one point, there's 20% of the feed going into a cow could be non-organic, and I said, well, what you do is when you buy 5 pints of milk, you throw one away, and they're written for organic.
Okay.
And that's almost like how it is. You think, well, what is organic, or what is clean, green electricity? And it's
Understand.
Lots of people, if it's going to give you a kicking, the way they come at you is usually something like that.
Yeah, no, I understand. It's a good question. Electricity in the UK is traded half hourly. So from a national grid point of view, all suppliers are bound to balance supply and demand on a half-hourly basis. So let's imagine we've got a group of customers over here that we've said we're going to supply. Now, the electrons that they buy, the electrons that come out of their plug, are not going to be Good Energy's electrons, because it's a centralised national grid system. But what we have to do is we have to put in the same amount of electricity that's demanded by those customers in that time. And you're quite right, the way we have to do that is we have to trade. So there will be occasions where we are in surplus, in which case we're going to be selling some of our excess electricity on the free market to suppliers that are in deficit. The big 6 suppliers have a duty to source a certain percentage of their supply from renewables. So there will be some occasions where we're selling some of our surplus to them to enable them to meet their requirements. There will be some occasions where we're short and other suppliers are in surplus, in which case we'll buy certified renewable electricity from them. So there is a free market. In the past, we've had less long-term contracts in place with suppliers, which has meant we've been more at the whim of the free market for electricity. Now, as I speak to you now, that's much, much less the case, and we've now got contracts in place that cover all of our demand requirements. That's good news for us, because it means that we're much more in control of the price that we need to charge to the customer. It's why we've been able to keep our prices stable for so long, because we've been much more in control of the trading arrangements from that point of view. So you're right, there's a trading system in place, and that trading system is going to become more complex as the percentage of renewables in the grid increases. But yeah, you're quite right, we have to buy and sell to meet demand. But we, as a supplier, if we don't balance our demand within a given time frame, there are penalties that the regulator puts on us. So that's how the whole system is enforced. Yes?
And if I may say, therefore, a sceptic would say that the more successful you are, then E.ON, npower, EDF's customers will be just getting a fraction less renewable energy in their tariffs and their supplies. And ultimately, all that's happening is that it's just rebalancing. We're not actually making a significant step change.
It's not done on generation capacity, it's done on demand. So E.ON, EDF, npower, they still have to meet a fixed percentage of their customers' demand from renewables. It's not on the capacity they happen to own or not to own. So they can only sell if they've got surplus. So there's a statutory instrument in place from the government that means that, let's say, as I speak to you now, let's imagine it's 8% of npower's electricity has to come from renewables. If they don't meet that obligation, they're at fault of their regulatory requirements. They can only sell to any other players in the marketplace once they've met their statutory requirement. So I would argue that it's going to raise the boats. If they've got a surplus they can sell to us, that's fine. If they don't, we can buy it from somewhere else. We can buy it from other smaller generators as well. So there are other options for us on the table. It increases the total amount of renewables in the grid.
Follow-on question to that.
Yes.
What's your kind of growth plan in terms of capacity? Because this is always a concern I have as an organisation that buys green energy, that I know that when I buy it, one of my competitors doesn't buy it because I've got that capacity. So where do you see the growth being, in your plans?
Oh, well, we're a publicly listed company, so therefore we have a publicly stated sort of growth plan. Last year, I think our electricity customers, I think I'm right in saying, grew by about 9%. So we grew about 9% electricity customers last year. And we've got an aspiration to continue that level of growth into the future. And we have a trading strategy in place to ensure that we can procure the amounts of power that we need to meet that customer demand. Essentially, we move into a situation where if we grow more quickly than we'd imagine we do, we're in a position where we have to involve ourselves more with trading and less with our kind of contracted generation. So that's the situation we want to avoid. So we have a trading strategy and a growth strategy in place that kind of work in tandem. Any more for any more? Oh.
So you're a public listed company, so I was just trying to reflect on what your business model was. I mean, it's just a normal PLC.
With the exception that 90% of our shareholders are our own customers. So as far as that point is concerned, the majority of the people who own us as an organisation are our own customers who buy into us. Yes, my friend.
I was going to ask what big new capacity, or what relatively big new capacity you've got in the pipeline that you're thinking about investing in.
Well, we've got a plan to build 50 megawatts of new capacity of varying types over the next 5 years. Our latest public consultation is for a scheme in Aberdeenshire, which I think I'm right in saying is a 6 megawatt wind scheme in Aberdeenshire, and we have a number of other schemes in the pipeline to meet our 50 megawatts target. Well, if we get there, that would mean we could supply all of our needs from our own owned generation resources as well. So that would give us really significant growth potential to grow the number of supply customers that we have.
Sorry, can I add then a caveat to that? You were just describing local ownership.
Yes.
Sorry, Aberdeenshire is a long way from Bristol.
No, absolutely.
And you are therefore relying on a national distribution system.
Yep.
So are you not then just playing the system like everybody else in terms of getting government subsidies to build green energy and then selling it and basically displacing fossil fuel energy, which we use by everybody else?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, it's part of our plan to have a network of installations all around the country. As I mentioned, our first installation is in Cornwall. Our second one happens to be in Aberdeen. Our third one will be somewhere else. Our fourth one will be somewhere else. So we're not all of a sudden going to rock up and go, well, that's brilliant, we're going to slam loads of generation capacity in Aberdeen. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about distributing it around the country. It just so happens to be that that's the second one of the two that we've done so far. So if you ask me that same question in a few years' time, I think you'll find that there will be a spread of technology from us around the UK. But good question, fair play.
Well, in your support, I would say that it makes sense to put them in the most windy places, which is what we're doing.
Yeah, well, there is that as well. There is that as well.
I think we're going to need to wrap up now. I don't know if you're able to hang around for a short while afterwards.
Yeah, I can hang around for a few minutes if anyone's got anything specific they want to know.
I'd like to say thank you very much to Matt and to heading out at this time in the morning to give us this incredibly interesting talk, Phil's first news of Big Green Week, and leaving us a lot to muse on.
That's the idea.
So thank you very much, Matt.
All right, thanks very much.
That one that I think everyone's pretty interested in
Okay.
is about